Hold up. My views are my own. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Lightning round. Dangerously close.
My guest today is Mike Ricksecker. Mike Ricksecker is the author of the Amazon bestselling A Walk in the Shadows, A Complete Guide to Shadow People, the esoteric tome Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, and 8 historic paranormal books. He has appeared on multiple television shows and programs, including History Channel's Ancient Aliens and the Unexplained, Travel Channel's The Alaska Triangle, Discovery Plus's Fright Club, Animal Planet's The Haunted, multiple series on Gaia TV, and more. Mike is the producer and director of the docuseries The Shadow Dimension, available on several streaming platforms, and produces additional full-length content on ancient wisdom, lost civilizations, and the supernatural on his extensive YouTube channel. And actually, I could go on and on and on. I could be reading an introduction to you for several more minutes, but people don't want to hear that. But I do need to mention one more book that has not come out yet, but it will be out by the time this podcast goes up, and that's Travels Through Time. So we'll be touching on that today, as well as Alaska's Mysterious Triangle. What's up, Mike?
Hey, thanks for having me, Doug. I really appreciate being here today. And thanks for mentioning the new book. I know you wanted to talk about that a little bit, and absolutely we will.
Oh, and I can't wait to read it. I was actually, I think I like I told you before we started recording, I wanted to talk about your book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, and you mentioned this other book, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, well, now I want to talk about this even more. So, we'll do both. It'll be a two-part thing. I guess, for most people, just kind of like a quick laying the groundwork for the Alaska Triangle. Everyone's probably, not understands, but everyone's heard of the Bermuda Triangle because of pop culture, movies. Everyone knows what that is. The Alaska Triangle is a little more obscure. It hasn't been around. It hasn't been in the world of people making theories and stuff. It's quite so long. And it's my understanding that the name got coined when 2 congressmen went missing in the Alaska Triangle. Is that correct? Is that the kind of the impetus?
Yeah, that would be about the time. Hale Boggs, Nick Begich. There are also 2 others on the plane. Of course, the pilot, Don Johns, and then the aide there to Hale Boggs, Russell Brown. So, that happened in 1972. Really, it was during a re-election campaign. And going from Anchorage to Juneau, they got lost somewhere in the Portage Pass, never to be found at all. No wreckage, nothing, completely disappeared. At that time, it was the largest search and rescue mission in U.S. history. They utilized spy planes. To this day, nothing, no clue has ever been found of their whereabouts. And with the triangle aspect of it, it's branding, really. When that happened with Bermuda, of course, there were a lot of strange things that were going on around the time in the 1940s. So Flight 19 was kind of really the big thing that propelled forward the notion that there was something. I mean, people already knew there were strange things that were going on in that area, going all the way back to Christopher Columbus. When he sailed through the area, he noticed strange activity going on. So there were always those different legends. Yeah. And Flight 19 is really kind of what catapulted that. And then as you start having different, journals and magazines and things like that cover these different types of strange phenomena, they had to come up with a catchphrase. And so they ended up coining it the Bermuda Triangle. And so you have these other areas around the world, like Alaska. There's actually a Nevada Triangle, Lake Michigan. There's the Dragons Triangle out by Japan, which is, the history of that dates far older than anything in the Atlantic with Bermuda. But
just for people that aren't familiar, briefly, what is Flight 19? Just in the importance.
Yeah. Flight 19. So this was a training flight that headed out from Fort Lauderdale. And it's just a routine mission. The reason why it was called Flight 19 was the 19th one of that particular day. And they were just on their regular route headed east. And when they turned north, ironically, the route that they were taking was a triangle. But as they turned north, all of a sudden they started having all this erratic behavior with their instrumentation. The compass started acting all wonky and other things. And so they're reporting in, hey, we're getting some strange compass readings. And then a large storm rolled in, and they ended up becoming, completely lost. Last that anybody had ever heard from them, they were trying to, duck under the clouds and kind of skim the surface of the water. But they started reporting other strange activity, like they're looking down below. One guy thought he saw the Florida Keys, which would have been the complete opposite direction, many, many miles. So there's no way that they should have been anywhere near the Keys. And so after they went missing, they sent out search and rescue planes, and one of the search and rescue planes went missing. So this, of course, became very, very legendary as to what happened to these, and nothing's ever been found of either.
Yeah. And I guess so, like, that's how people draw the parallel to Alaska and the Alaska Triangle is, one of the main things about it is that people go missing in this area. And I don't know off the top of my head the statistics, it's far above average of any other triangle you might draw in the United States. I don't know if I'm correct.
Yeah, they say, and this was a number we were throwing around when we were talking on the Alaska Triangle television. So what was that, about 3-4 years ago now? And 18,000 people since 1988. Well, more people have gone missing since then as well. So yeah, and what's funny is for a while they were calling it Alaska's Bermuda Triangle. So, so they just gotta rip the name from that. But
yeah.
But you have these different areas around the world that are very similar to these. Yes,
that is such a branding thing. Like they're like, how about we call it Alaska's Bermuda Triangle? It's like, how about you just call it Alaska's Triangle?
Right.
Obviously, there are so many theories. We can maybe just kind of touch on a few. But one thing too, besides like the congressman going missing, as well as the pilot and the other passengers of the plane, have there been any other like kind of major disappearances that kind of really made news?
Yeah, I mean, there have been several. Probably one of the earliest big news ones was 1950. It was a Douglas Skymaster taken off from Elmendorf Air Force Base, 44 personnel aboard, and that went missing just on the edge of what we call the Alaska Triangle. And by the way, the Alaska Triangle stretches from Juneau to Anchorage to Yukiavik, which used to be known as Barrow, all the way at the top, and of course back down. So very, very large area of land, about the size of the state of California.
Yeah.
And part of it does cut into Canada. And right on the edge, as they were crossing over into Canada around a area called Snag in Yukon Territory, they lost complete contact with this airplane. And it was a fine day. It was January, so it would have been a little chilly, but no storms, no snow, nothing like that. I mean, there's snow on the ground, but
yeah,
they weren't driving, or they weren't flying through a blizzard or anything like that, and just completely disappeared. And at that point, it's kind of interesting. So the Boggs baggage, became the largest search and rescue mission in U.S. history. Well, prior to that was this one in 1950. That was the largest search and rescue in U.S. history. And they combined with Canadian forces because they were actually, of course, it happened in Canada, but they were actually running drills with Canadian forces at the time, doing some war games and things like that up there. So they pulled a bunch of personnel off of that to go look for this airplane. Again, nothing was ever found. And what's kind of fascinating is just a few weeks later, there was a smaller plane, much smaller plane, that went down in the area where they believed the Skymaster went down. They found that immediately without any problems whatsoever, but yet still couldn't find anything with this, huge Douglas Skymaster airplane. To this day, again, nothing's ever been found.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. It raises questions, and like you said, and like the number has gone up. But when you were doing the TV show, the number you guys were using was 18,000 people since 1988. That's practically, I mean, that's not practically, that's literally like a town. That's like if a whole town just disappeared, and that's
right. And it's even more pronounced being in Alaska, because the entire population of the state of Alaska is about the same as the city of San Francisco.
wow.
So you put it into that type of context, that number of people going missing in the city of San Francisco, that's a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So putting it in that perspective, for people that have been to San Francisco, that would be like if the financial district, everyone just disappeared.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, obviously it didn't happen in a day, but still very question raising. So you have written about vortices, portals, strange phenomenon of that sort. Can you kind of like just kind of give me a picture of what that means, like what, and how it's applicable to the missing people phenomenon?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about the creation of a vortex, basically what's happening here is you have the magnetism of the Earth's core, which is basically spinning molten metal, right? And so it creates a magnetic field, and that's gives us our magnetic shield around the planet and protects us from the Earth's the sun's rays, right? Which is a good thing. However, as that magnetism passes through different areas of the Earth, passes through the mantle, passes through the crust, it interacts with different metals and minerals, and in different size quantities. And depending on what it passes through, it can create other strange electromagnetism, stronger anomalies and things like this. And actually, in 1965, the U.S. Department of the Interior did a survey of Alaska, only about 100,000 square miles, because again, it's a massive area of land. Alaska's 2.5 times the size of Texas. It's over 600,000 square miles.
It's so easy to forget how huge Alaska is.
It is, yeah, because it's at the top of the globe. Usually, when we see a map of it, like the map of the United States, they put it in a little corner, that sort of thing. It's like, no, it's absolutely huge. But they did a pretty substantial survey up there, and in this 100,000 square miles, they classified what they called 5 different magnetic characters, and within these different characters, they discovered what they called negative anomalies. So these areas of electromagnetism that would wreak havoc on the area. And you think of Alaska, it's a very volatile area to begin with, because there's a lot of earthquakes up there. There's a lot of seismic activity. There's volcanic activity that occurs up there. And then also, even though we talked about the magnetism of the planet, helping to protect us from the sun rays, it's actually thinner up there. And so you'll have, the solar wind, battering against that area of the globe. And that's why we end up with those, the auroras and things like that. And so it's you really have this magnificent cocktail of different energies that are mixing around up there.
Yeah. I never really thought about that too, because that's, you're at this very extreme angle, which does create these beautiful natural vistas, like the auroras and so much stuff like that. But also, like what else might be not visible to the naked eye, and that could be a vortex of some sort. And I know this is kind of like, this is a really broad question, so maybe answer it in any way you might kind of feel like. But when speaking of a vortex, like what we're talking about, like maybe like something that might occur in the Alaska Triangle, what are the properties of something of like a natural occurrence like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's something you'd have to get out with magnetometers and things like that to measure, which you'd have to. And that's what the U.S. Department of the Interior did, is they went out with that different equipment to actually measure it. So, really what you're talking about here are fluctuations within within what would be a standard degree of magnetism. So, when we go out there with, just as, somebody who's, I don't want to say amateur, but the equipment that we're using isn't as sophisticated as what, say, the government would have. So, we might have a tri-field meter in our hands, and you're watching the gauge, the milligauss go up and down and things like that. So we'll go out to an area and you'll try to measure those type of properties. Something that can also work well for this is, like using an old school method, dowsing rods. And that's still used by engineers today to find things like water underground pipes, things like that. It's actually a verifiable method to be able to find things underground. So you can find electromagnetic anomalies there under the ground with something like dowsing rods. And so the area in which these can spawn up, for lack of a better term, can be small, they can be wide. You have to think about this as that magnetism is welling up out of the ground. It's not just a steady stream. You're talking about molten metal within the Earth's core that is spinning around, and so you're going to have these ebbs and flows to that. It's almost like a pulsating type of energy that is coming up and welling up out of the ground. So you're going to have some smaller waves and some stronger ones too. And so when it reaches the surface, you're going to have smaller, almost negligible reactions, and you're going to have some larger ones too. And of course, we see that even from our own sun. When the solar wind hits us, we'll have smaller solar flares and bigger ones. So the same thing with the Earth and what's coming up out of the core.
So theoretically, a vortex could potentially affect the instruments on, say, like an airplane, a helicopter, any kind of vehicle that has navigational instruments, like that could be affected by this phenomenon. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. And so when we look at something like Flight 19 and their instrumentation all of a sudden going awry, it would be something like a strong magnetic wave all of a sudden interfering with their compasses. Compasses are they rely on magnetism, and when you put a magnet close to one and you see it start spinning like crazy. And so that's essentially what they were experiencing there. And when it comes to Alaska, one of the ideas, of course, with some of these planes going missing, instrumentation starts acting crazy. Those sorts of things are going on, even with ships. The SS Princess Sophia, which is known as the Alaska's Titanic, 1918, when that sank, they got caught up in a storm, sure, and they ended up getting caught on a reef. Well, the captain had navigated that channel countless times. He knew exactly where to sail the ship. And so once the storm kicked up, he had only his compasses and navigational equipment to rely upon. And one of the ideas there is that, that started acting awry because of the electromagnetism of the area and ended up on the reef rather than in safe waters.
Yeah, especially if you can't even rely on an instrument as simple as a basic compass.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to like just because aircraft and speaking about how we started this off, like because obviously the manhunt, the search and rescue looking for these congressmen was that's a huge multi-agency task force. But I mean, one potential explanation could be they flew through a zone that affected their instruments, and like we said, Alaska is enormous, and if the pilot just inadvertently, and they're in a jet going very fast, took them off course in a direction that nobody would have guessed, and they could have easily crashed in an area that's unpopulated, hundreds of miles from anything else. So that's that's rather than saying they disappeared into thin air, it could also just be they went so far off course that the search and rescue mission had no frame of reference for how far they could have been.
Yeah, that's always a possibility. Some of these disappearances, we like to, in our field, a lot of people like to jump immediately to, it's something supernatural in nature. Well, a lot of these people that went missing, got lost in the woods, and hate to say, they probably got eaten by a bear. Yeah. They got lost. Some of them just wanted to get lost in the woods.
Yeah.
Certain individuals are just, they want to get away from society. They go out there and they live off the land for a little while and eventually pass away.
Okay. The famous guy, McCandless.
Mm-hmm.
What was that book? Into the Wild, right? Is that?
Yeah, Into the Wild. So you have people like that. So some of these things are legitimate, and yes, every once in a while they will encounter a plane that went down and had gone missing decades beforehand, and that happens. So But some of these, like the ones with Boggs Baggage, the flight path being the Portage Pass going through there. Well, we know they entered it. The last known communication was as they were heading into it, and it's a long stretch, and it's the area that you're not going to fly your plane out of. Basically, what happened is you get too close to the walls of the mountains and crash into the mountain. They
Yeah.
didn't find any evidence of a crash. Of course, if once they come out of the pass, and it's a lengthy pass too, then it's kind of open game there from there to Juneau. But if that was the case, why didn't they radio in to say, okay, we've made it through the pass, we're en route to Juneau, as would usually be the case there. So
Yeah.
you're still kind of scratching your head. Yes, they could have gone way off course and never found again, that sort of thing. But you kind of scratch your head. Well, why? To some of those different questions.
And I guess, and just to throw out one more thing on the missing persons, like you said, there's so many reasons. You can get lost. You can get eaten by a bear. You could be like McCandless from Into the Wild. You go out there unprepared, and you're just not ready for the Alaska winter if you get trapped out there. And one other thing, there's so much true crime. There's true crime podcasts dedicated exclusively to Alaska because they have probably a higher percentage of serial killers or just people murderers of any sort, and it just it's a place to go up and get lost. So that's another potential thing, is you got people that that are murderers that are good at covering their tracks.
Yeah, and you have to keep into the context. The percentages of anything in Alaska are going to be higher simply because the population is so much lower.
Yeah.
So you can play around with statistics as much as you want. The percentages are always higher there because of the lower population. But what is interesting, talking about true crime, there was an interesting report that came out, let's say it was almost 10 years ago now, in which there was an individual coming forward that had participated in a number of different high-profile crimes in Alaska, and he was basically spilling his guts to the local law enforcement up there, and they forwarded some information onto the FBI, because one of the cases that he said that he was involved with was the Boggs Baggage case. And what he said was that he was hired, again, don't ask any questions. He was hired back at that time to simply go up to the plane, drop a case off in the plane, walk away. And in his circles later on, he was told that this case included an explosive. And so he was divulging this information. Of course, there were several people that wanted the case reopened to look into the Boggs Baggage disappearance again. It would have been at that point in time, 30 years after the fact.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to. And their reasoning for that was, we have scoured that area relentlessly. If there had been an explosion, we would have found some sort of shrapnel. And they even included saying that other planes have crashed in the area since then, or have gone down, made emergency landings, whatever, over those 30 years. And we still have not found one shred of any wreckage of the Boggs Baggage plane. So it's interesting, because you have now an element of possible crime involved within it, and still.
And I feel like I'm just kind of bouncing all around, especially because I was just going down the path of just trying to say, like, yes, there's always several instances of things that can be easily can be explained away in a traditional way that you might want to. You also happen to be, we're going to go into kind of back into a more supernatural kind of realm with this, though, and you're an expert on the shadow realm, shadow people, and this is something that you actually write about in regards to the Alaska Triangle, as well as having being an element. Just for everyone who has never heard of this, the shadow realm or shadow people, can you just kind of give a brief overview of what that is?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Or I guess I mean
because
you don't have to be brief. Just however you feel like.
Right, because because that crack crack opens a whole barrel of worms.
Yeah.
Because the whole, answering the question, what is a shadow person? It's like, well, they can be all kinds of different things. But basically, the idea of shadow person, this is some sort of being, some sort of entity that appears to us. It might appear in a room. We might see something run down the hall. We might see something out in the woods, and looks human in form, but is a shadow. You don't really see any discernible features. You might see some eyes. They might appear to be wearing some sort of clothing, but it's very shadowy, very vague, very dark in nature. Some are very translucent. You'll also have like some mists and wisps sort of thing. So some may just be like an amorphous form, almost like a dark cloud. Some may just be, you'll get a glimpse of something and it just darts by. So they take a lot of different shapes and forms and this sort of thing, but we all kind of group them together under shadow beings. And they can be a lot of different things. So we could be talking like human spirit who doesn't fully form as an apparition. We could be talking some sort of interdimensional being. We could be talking an extraterrestrial. It's taking a number of different forms. We could be talking time slips or time travelers. We could be talking astral projections. They can be a lot of different things. But what it comes down to is the way that energy basically morphs into our plane of existence, in the way that our eyes are able to actually view it, because we only see into a certain spectrum of light.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing too, for however you might prefer to explain it. I think it's something that I would guess most people at some time or another have experienced seeing something like a shadow person, like out of the corner of your eye. What's that? Who is that? Like, especially, yeah, like when this happens a lot to people that are maybe tired, middle of the night kind of thing, in the woods. There's all kinds of different scenarios in which this can happen. But you said something a minute ago, and I was just curious because you said time traveler, but then you said a time slip. As that's a different type of is that sorry that's
well, it's intention, really. Time, we would call a time traveler somebody who is intentionally trying to travel within time. Something like a time slip is more accidental in nature, for lack of a better term. We'll get a glimpse of another moment in time, and a lot of times they'll get chalked up to it was a ghost or an apparition or something like that. But some of these cases like that, we'll see, like a scene kind of morph into existence from another point in time. And the people within that scene will turn and look at us as if we're the ghost. Well, that's something that's basically a time slip.
Yeah.
Fascinating story in regards to time slips and shadows is a story that was related to me a couple of years ago now. I was a young man, and when he was a child, he had walked into the kitchen, saw this tall, dark, hooded figure standing over by the kitchen table, scared him to death, boom, ran out of the kitchen. Years later, he's in the kitchen, he's making a sandwich, and he's wearing a hoodie, and all of a sudden, in the doorway, he sees this short shadow person walk into the room and then, boom, take off. And he realizes in that moment, oh my God, that was me when I was a kid. And basically, I didn't see anything dark or sinister. I actually just saw myself.
Yeah.
And it basically scared myself. Basically, two moments in time that resonating close enough to each other in that moment where it came across as a shadow form.
That actually, I don't know why, but that story just kind of was like, it's not a scary story, but it was just kind of gave me a little chill, just a little bit, just kind of like, it's I don't know, man. It's stuff like that because I'm someone who experiences deja vu fairly frequently, and I don't really have a personal theory for it. I've heard lots of different takes. I've heard one thing that I like to believe is that when you're experiencing a lot of deja vus, it means that you're following the correct path in your life, and that's for whatever reason that's a side effect. I just like to believe that because it's it's comforting. But I wonder, I wonder if there is any way to kind of tie in the idea of time slip to the idea of deja vu.
Yeah, I mean, it's all related. I have my whole idea of the connected universe. Everything is connected, and with deja vu, there's I get a lot of deja vus via like dreams that I've had. Sometimes I'll have a dream, and the entire thing plays out for me a couple weeks, month, 2 months later, whatever it is, somewhere down the road. I'll walk into a place like, oh my gosh, I just
Yeah.
had a dream about this place. Sometimes it's not as distinct like that, where it's walk into a place like this is really familiar, and there'll be just a little notion of I had a dream about this place, but it won't be like fully formed. I won't quite remember that full dream. So yeah, you could look at it as you're on the right path or whatever you where you're supposed to be. Because I think what's happening, not all dreams, of course, but actual precognitive dreams in which we will get a glimpse of something in the future. You can actually look at that a little bit as a form of time travel, or at least getting a glimpse of something at another point in time, because okay, we're tapping into it, we're seeing it with our mind's eye while we're asleep, and then all of a sudden, boom, we find ourselves there.
Yeah, that's interesting. You would bring up. I didn't bring that up earlier, but I don't know if it's like the primary type of deja vu that I have, but it is certainly the most kind of affecting, the most kind of profound feeling ones are the ones where I'm at a certain place doing a certain activity and have the sense that I've already done this and that I've already been here, and then I remember it was a dream because
Right.
you wake up from your dreams, especially if it was a mundane dream. You're not going to go, oh, I'm going to write this dream down. But oftentimes it is oftentimes mundane too. It'll be like that I was in a restaurant and I ordered a particular thing and I'm like, I dreamt that I dreamt this very mundane, normal interaction. I feel like I took us a little bit further from where we very first started, which was talking about shadow people in relation to the Alaska Triangle. And I'm just curious, in what way can that tie in?
So, shadow activity is certainly some of the paranormal activity that is reported up in Alaska. There's quite a bit of paranormal activity. There's a lot of UFOs. Shadow activity is one of those kind of in that realm. But I've actually experienced that when I was stationed up there. It was 1992 and 1995, and 2 of those years I was in the basement of the Alaska Command Building in a secure facility, and it was mostly around the back office area. Although, and most of the people down there saw this stuff. It was bizarre. We couldn't really talk about it in detail.
Yeah.
Couldn't run it up the chain of command, because once you start talking about that sort of stuff, you're going to find yourself down at mental health, and you're going to pull your security clearance and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
no fun.
no, not at all. So it was kind of amongst whispers to ourselves, like really one of the first times that even acknowledged it.
If you don't mind if I interrupt,
Yeah,
can I ask what branch this was?
yeah, I was Air Force.
Air Force.
Yeah, I was in the Air Force for 6 years. Yeah, first 3 years was Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska, and yeah. So we shared our office was Worldwide Military Command Control Systems, which is now Global Command Control Systems, and we shared space with the Base Communication Center. So we were doing more for worldwide command in that type of communication system, while they were just basically taking in messages for the base. In any case, that aside, one of the first acknowledgments that this was going on, and I'd already seen a couple things, but my supervisor down there, when I first got into that shop, he had been away on leave or had a temporary duty somewhere or whatever. I can't quite remember what was going on with him, because he finally showed up like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, and we're sitting down in his office and just having a little chat, getting to know you sort of thing. And I noticed something kind of dart by his door.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like a whistle, little bit of a shadow. And he notices that I notice it.
Yeah.
And he just simply says, yeah, that happmes here. And then went on. And then went on with whatever we were talking about.
Oh
like,
my
okay,
God.
Okay. So it was interesting, because over those couple of years, and you'd be walking down the little hallway there, because it's just a bunch of cubicles that was in this big open space before you got to the communications part of it, or before you got to the servers and everything. And you'd just be walking down one of the short little halls, and you see something dart, down one of the other little halls or whatever, and you kind of look at your buddy and like, yeah, I saw that too. So there was like this prevailing legend that came out of this, that the that area, since it was in the basement of the building, people talked about the building having once been a hospital, and that where we were at was the morgue, and where our racks of like patch panels and multiplexers and crypto devices, all that stuff, that room was where they kept the coolers. So as I'm doing the research for my book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, I want to include this story and what we experienced down there. So I'm doing the research on the building, because I want to verify all my facts and everything. Okay, when was it a hospital, etc. Come to find out, the building was never a hospital. It was built for exactly what it was being used for, which was command. So then I had to ask the question, okay, so why in the world were we seeing these shadows if they weren't like, spirits of the dead sort of thing, which is where everybody was going with that sort of idea. And, given the environment, and when we're talking, okay, we're in the Alaska Triangle, so we already have the electromagnetism there, the prevailing stuff coming up out of the earth. We're also in a command center where there is a lot of electromagnetic activity. And so it kind of, we talked earlier about energy kind of creating a cocktail in those soup and all that sort of stuff. And we're getting rocked with earthquakes on occasion, things like that. So it just made me wonder, and there's no way to know for sure without going back and investigating. Of course, I'm never going to let us do that. Were we possibly seeing, going back to time slips, glimpses of personnel from the past, future? Maybe we were seeing ourselves, because none of this was like sinister in nature or anything like that. We were just seeing, shadows moving in and around and about the area.
Yeah.
So it's one possible idea.
And not to sound silly, but I have to bring it up because it just seems, it's kind of like you can't ignore it, is that it seems like the Air Force guys have to deal with this the most. It's like Air Force bases are the ones that are the most often something unexplainable is happening. I feel like that happens far less to like, Marines, Army, other guys. I
think, because a lot of the guys that are kind of in our niche, in our area of research, are a lot of Air Force guys. And other branches are represented too. I mean, I know guys from the Army and Marines, Navy, and all that. But some of my closer friends are Air Force guys. I think, especially with our connections to UFO activity. I think that's really where it kind of comes into play. For a long time, like with Project Blue Book, it was the Air Force that was involved with Project Blue Book. So I think that's really where it stems from, is our connection to UFOs, UAPs.
Yeah, I mean, even recently with the Navy and all the stuff that's come out recently with Pentagon, it's still the pilots. So it's
right.
It's Air Force adjacent. Do you mind if I share like a very quick just anecdote from my a personal experience of my own? And
sure, go ahead.
I'm just curious about like maybe if you have a take on it. This was many years ago. I was working with the National Forest Service. I was doing a Sawyer training type thing, and I was with probably at least 30 other people out in the woods. We were camping and having to share tents. So I was in a tent with like 4 other people, and an extremely vivid dream. It was a lucid dream. And I came across what can only be explained in my dream is like kind of just like a dark entity, being, however you want to call it, but a negative force that was but it was a dream, but I was lucid dreaming, so it seemed very real, and I needed to wake up. So I started kind of like hyperventilating, trying to move the wake up process along, which is a little trick for people that have lucid dreamed a lot. That's, if you want out fast, hyperventilate. But when I came out of the dream, the like the being that I had encountered in my dream appeared to me to be a fully formed, solid, in this world creature on top of me. and I don't recall if I was able to make much noise, but it was a brief thing. It wasn't there for very long, but it appeared to have come completely into the world that I live in, this physical realm. And then, then it was gone. And then I was waking up everybody else in the tent, like, oh my God, but it was, I didn't have any evidence. Do you have any, does that fall in any kind of theory or?
Right. No, it's actually something that's called old hag syndrome. Because a lot of times when people experience this, they have the visage of like the old woman sitting on their chest. And this is actually something that has been for thousands of years has been talked about. It actually goes back to the time of ancient Sumer, where people were reporting seeing the visage of Alu, which was one of our interpretation of the word is quote unquote demon, which is really a loose interpretation. It was an udug, and what the shamans would do would invoke a good udug to combat the bad udug, sort of thing. But in any case, this thing would hover over people at night. It had very, very similar properties to what we would call a shadow person today. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Then this thing actually didn't even have limbs. But over the millennia, different cultures have had their own interpretation of that phenomenon, whether it's the old hag sitting in the chest, some sort of ghoul, that sort of thing. And it can take a number of different forms. It can be extremely solid, sometimes not as solid. One of the accounts in my book, A Walk in the Shadows, this woman woke up to a dire wolf sitting on her chest, ended up waking up the husband because she's struggling. What's really bizarre about that one is he looks down at his wife. He doesn't see the wolf himself, but he saw the impressions of paw prints on her shoulders.
Wow.
Turned on the light and the whole event ended. But people have been reporting this type of phenomenon for thousands of years. So you're not alone. And there's a lot of different theories as to who and what they may be, what they want. Again, we're some people immediately jump to, oh, they're all demons, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, these could not very simply, but they could very well be interdimensional beings, something from some other plane of existence. Some people believe that they're like the jinn from the Middle Eastern legends. But this phenomena does occur a lot. So and it goes along with the sleep paralysis as well, which can happen at that time where people are unable to move at night, which is a real biological phenomenon. I mean, that happens to people with or without these beings, but a lot of people will experience the paralysis with it. Other people don't. There's a guy I know who claims that he actually was able to physically take this being and throw it off of him, and they fell onto the floor rolling around, which is quite interesting. So there's a mix of tales, but what you experience is certainly legitimate.
I had no idea that it had that long of a history, because what I'm mostly familiar with is just there's a lot of memes out there about what you said with sleep paralysis and people making jokes about their sleep paralysis demon. And that's kind of like, so I was like, okay, well, this is a thing that people, I'm not the only person that's had something like this, but the idea that it sits on your chest, that it appears to want something, like that's crazy. This goes back thousands of years. I had no one's ever actually mentioned that to me before, that this wasn't just maybe an overactive nightmare. But you know what, man?
It's something that's real. It's legitimate. So yeah, you're not alone.
I could go on. The thing is, if I was able to ask you every single question I want to talk to you about with the Alaska Triangle, it would take weeks. So what I'm going to say to everyone right now, the Alaska go just pick up the book Alaska's Mysterious Triangle by Mike Ricksecker. You can delve into, we barely scratched the surface. We didn't even barely scratch the surface of the things that are to talk about with the subject. But I want to move on to your new book, Travels Through Time. And this sounds fascinating to me. I cannot wait till it comes out. When this episode is out, this book will be out. So you might need to help me with this word. Ouroboros?
Ouroboros, yes. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So ancient alchemy and the secret of the Ouroboros. What are Ouroboros?
So Ouroboros is that symbol of the snake eating its own tail.
Oh, cool.
It's the symbol of eternal recycle and renewal. And we see that symbol. The first incarnation that we saw of it was on the shrine of King Tutankhamun. It was basically encircling his head and actually encircling his feet. A lot of people don't see that image, but there is one like that as well. We see it in some other ancient Egyptian tombs as well, and then we see it in ancient alchemy. This is something that kind of one of the more famous images is it, an illustration from the 1400s by Theodorus Pelecanos, and it's the one that has the feet, kind of has fins. It's two different colors, red and green, and there's a whole bunch of text and things like that surrounding it. But he had actually transcribed this, made a copy of it from an older alchemical tract from around 390 AD. It's really a last vestige almost of the lost library of Alexandria, which is fascinating to me. But within that symbol that we've seen, throughout time, you have between the two colors, you have the idea of duality. The feet and the fins represent different parts of the alchemical mantra. But then the snake eating its own tail, the constant renewal and recycle, we see that concept throughout history, in which the ancients would talk about, after this time, there is another time, and there was a time before this, that we are constantly, civilizations rising, falling, and starting again, but not just civilization, the entire universe. So the question of what was before this universe? What was before the Big Bang? Well, there was the universe before. It was another one before ours that basically was destroyed, and then we were born back out of it. And I tie this into the recent studies that have been done down in Antarctica with the Ice Cube project and the Anita project specifically, in which they were doing research on neutrinos and found them acting in a very, very bizarre way. And when reports first came out some years ago, they were basically laughed at because they were kind of in more tabloid-esque journals talking about, hey, there's a parallel universe running in reverse time. And they kind of got laughed at. But then earlier this year, peer-reviewed article, published paper of, no, this is actually legitimate. They have, through these neutrinos, have detected a parallel universe running in reverse time. And so, what would that look like? If you had another world here with us running in reverse time, and it comes back around? Well, that's our symbol of the Ouroboros. One part is the tail, one part is the head, and when they meet, that's the Big Bang.
Wow.
It's
Okay,
both.
so, yeah.
It's both the beginning and the end, the
Yeah.
alpha and the omega, the yin and the yang, all of that.
And almost in a way too, it's a, or at least for me, and I don't know how it is for everyone, but it's almost a slightly easier way to take the concept of infinity and make it a little more something you can grasp just a little bit more, because for me, I know that, I mean, the concept of infinity is not something really anyone can truly grasp, but yeah, the idea of the Ouroboros and kind of making it that kind of symbol. So that's amazing. That was on the Tutankhamun's sarcophagus.
Yeah, it was on his on the shrine, which basically was housed the sarcophagus. Yeah.
Wow. I guess moving forward to we're going to go back to the idea of time slips, and you have historic and modern account of time slips. You just told the amazing.
I just told one.
Yeah, that story. The story that gave me chills about the little boy seeing himself in the future, being terrified of him, and then in the future realizing he was the menacing figure. Would you be willing to share maybe one more account?
Yeah, one out of history. We'll give a historical one. The famous German poet Goethe. He's basically walking down the street one day. He's headed to Dressenheim. He's basically having an affair with a young woman. And on the other side of the road, he notices this man that's dressed kind of strangely, he's in this gold trimmed gray suit. He's like, okay, that's kind of a dapper guy, and then all of a sudden, the guy disappears. Like, what in the world was that? Okay. Years later, he's leaving Drosselheim, walking down the same road, and realizes, looking down at himself, oh my God, I'm that guy. I'm in the gold trimmed gray suit. I saw myself. So, so it's kind of fascinating that because and he admits in his writing, he was very very much lost in thought at that time because of this woman and the situation and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I think we can all relate to how your mind can kind of drift and that sort of thing. And so really, he was almost in a little bit of a meditative state, and somehow his consciousness was able to tune into himself at another point in time when he was on that road and actually got a glimpse of himself.
And I guess I know that you write a lot about the paradoxes. I mean, this is kind of like the hardest thing about having a conversation about time travel or even time slipping, which would be like ideas such as, if you were to go to a moment in time that was, especially if you went into the past, it would immediately alter the entire future. And I guess with a time slip, is there some kind of way around that, in the sense that maybe because it has always been that way? Is that kind of one of the ways to kind of avoid that paradox?
Well, how do I put this? Paradoxes are going to happen. They're actually,
yeah.
and we use them in a way, with like sci-fi movies and things like that in our pop culture. They become almost like a storytelling gimmick. But I think we're actually seeing some of these different things play out, when we talk about things like the Mandela effect. And I don't just mean like, we're misremembering the branding on a particular package. There are events that happen that several people from across the world are kind of scratching their heads like, nah, I remember that completely differently. They had no contact with each other, but somehow, they remember it the same.
Yeah.
So, that is a repercussion of something happening where there was an event that was slightly modified, and people ask, well, why would somebody want to go back and change that particular event? Because sometimes it's just really mundane, right? It's like, well, it might be something else that was that they went back to visit and touched or whatever, and basically the butterfly effect. Somewhere down the road,
Yeah.
it had these other repercussions. So when we look at paradoxes, it's really the result of some sort of tampering with time.
Okay, and this. I'm glad that this is what I had next to talk about, because we had discussed this in relation to deja vus, or at least with me, which is in your book, it's written as dreams and accessing eternal knowledge.
Yeah.
And maybe you just kind of like a little overview of what you mean by that.
Yeah, so when we're talking kind of quote unquote eternal knowledge, is the idea of the collective unconscious, which was a theory proposed by Carl Jung, famous psychologist, and of course, there's also the idea of the Akashic records. They're both very similar to each other. This idea that there is free, for lack of a better term, free floating information of the universe that's out there for us to be able to tap into and essentially download. And when we're in our sleep and dreaming, I think it's a little bit easier for us to be able to tap into that in our different brainwave states. And so you'll see things, happen like all of a sudden everybody's trying to invent the same thing, like the light bulb or the telegraph or whatever, all across the world. And how in the world did these guys all suddenly, very, very little contact with each other, and of course they're all competing with each other, suddenly start to try to invent the same thing, right? Yeah. So somehow they're tapping into that same piece of information, and so that's knowledge that isn't eternally available. And I say eternal, so it's always there for us. But then somebody will ask, well, then why can't we suddenly get the the answer for how we travel across the cosmos in 5 minutes so that we can get to some of these other solar systems and planets. It's
Mhm.
like, well, you have to realize that, sure, you might be able to tap into that information, but would you really understand it at this point in time? There's a progression to
Yeah.
learning and knowing some of these things. Our minds are more of set in the world of Newtonian physics, and we're just starting to get into things like quantum and things like that. So whatever that information is, we have to have some sort of basic understanding of how to pull it off. Otherwise, it would just be complete gibberish to us.
Yeah. No, I 100% subscribe to the concept, especially what you're saying, like when in certain points in history where a very revolutionary new idea or technology or whatever occurs, but it also occurs on the other side of the planet, no contact, especially during time periods when we didn't have telecommunications or any kind of way to spread those ideas. And maybe kind of on more of a, this is might not tie in as well, but it's something that everyone has witnessed so much, and that's in like the world of sports, and probably the most easy to explain or to use as an example is the speed record. Like whoever is the fastest guy in the so when Usain Bolt ran faster than anyone else in the world has ever run, suddenly a bunch of people can run that fast. And
Right.
and 50 years ago no one could. And I guess people explain that the idea is like, well, once people know that it's possible, they can do it. I don't know. I don't know if that applies as well, or if that's just kind of a side note.
That's yeah, I think that's one of those of we are talking about the human consciousness here, and and I think there is something to be said for that. Once we know something is possible, then boom, our mind can expand to reach that. Because I think it's one of those cases in which the human mind needs to believe it first before it can actually do it. And once somebody else has done it, well, okay, well, it can be done, so I'm going to go
Yeah.
do it. But yeah, then you have some of these so it's related, not exactly the same, but then you have these others, like you were saying, no telecommunications, and they're doing things that just boggle the mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Like building pyramids. That's probably
Right.
probably the
Yeah,
greatest example.
you look at the step pyramid, and you look at in Egypt, and then Chichen Itza. It's like, how in the world if they had no contact with each other? Although they may have that. That's a story for
Yeah.
another day.
I'm going to continue to jump around,
Mhm.
but I kind of have to, because I know that we're only going to scratch the surface of this book as well. But I did want to ask the idea of the universe as a simulation.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with time?
Well, because time is one of those parameters of the simulation. So it's one of the rules that's been set in here. Sometimes we're able to bend or break rules within the simulation. And so on occasion, we're able to kind of come out and have a time slip or something like that.
Yeah.
But the idea of the simulated universe, and I'm not necessarily talking about the Matrix and being in a computer simulation per se.
Yeah.
I believe it's something that's more organic, biological in nature. But if you look at our ancient religions, they actually talk about this without using the word simulation.
Mhm.
So, like a lot of Eastern beliefs, Eastern philosophies talk about reincarnation, that we come from somewhere, we come down here for a period of time, learn some lessons, go back up, come back, again and again, recycling. Which is basically what you do when you're in something like a simulation, like say a flight simulator or something like that.
Yeah.
You log into it, fly around for a little while, learn a few things in the simulation, and then you log back out. Even Christianity, they talk about we're down here preparing for a new world to go on to somewhere else. So this is just a temporary world.
I have never once in my life thought about that. The idea of the Christian element of that you are preparing for the next world that is like, for whatever reason is a more advanced world. Or
Mhm.
that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
guess you,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say the same thing with with the Vikings with Valhalla.
Mhm.
They're battling on Earth with the hopes of later battling in Valhalla, like an upgraded level of the simulation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so, you know, with that in mind, the way the universe has been constructed is from some external source. It set up the ground rules, it set up the parameters. One of those elements is time. So when we talk about wherever it is we come from, the home world, what have you, it's going to have a different set of rules and parameters than us. So you take like the idea of a video game or what have you. You can do all kinds of fantastical things within a video game that you can't do here in the real world. So it's that kind of similar type of concept. And you take a look at the way of time might work in a video game, like especially like RPGs that have day and night cycles that are very
Yeah,
very a lot quicker than normal life. So time does work differently. So
it's
then go ahead.
oh, no, you go ahead.
I was going to say then that's one aspect of it, but you also have to consider this other world or plane of existence is in a different dimensional space. So ourselves, we're in the fourth dimension, which is time.
Yeah,
Time is just a human construct used to describe our reality. We use it to keep track of the seasons, when to plant crops, when to show up at the job at the right moment, that sort of thing. Um, but above that, fifth dimension, time to somebody in the fifth dimension would look like kind of any 3D object to us. Unfortunately, because of that concept, when we try to depict time from the fifth dimension, we basically put a 3D object on top of a 3D object, which is bizarre.
yeah.
It would look very different. But that's basically the concept, is that if we were in a dimension outside of time, we would be able to see all time, every moment from beginning to end.
One of my favorite books by Kurt Vonnegut uh, explores that subject. It's the book Slaughterhouse-Five,
Yeah,
and
I've read that. Yeah.
the aliens are called the Trail Malfadorians. They live in the fifth dimension, and they
Mhm.
see all time as one landscape, and they choose to look at time in in ways like as though it's music or paintings. They just try to look at the most pleasant aspects of time and try to kind of ignore the unpleasant aspects, but they feel as though there's nothing they can do to change time because like you said, to them it's a three-dimensional object.
Right. And they're rather accepting of what's going to happen.
Yeah. uh and so I guess this kind of moves into just the idea of time as a linear construction. It goes one direction, so people generally just accept that what happens in the past can affect the future. Although we have just talked about the Ouroboros and also the research going on with the neutrinos, showing there's a parallel dimension where time is moving in an opposite direction. Does any of this stuff is this kind of how you get to the idea of the future being able to affect the past?
Yeah. So I have my theory is called stacked time theory. So you take every moment at a specific location, like right where you're sitting. Every moment that has happened, is happening, and will happen are all happening concurrently. And Einstein has some theories on this that it's interesting because these ideas popped in my head a couple decades ago. I was like, "Oh, that'd be an interesting concept." I started digging into it a little bit. Oh, Einstein has some ideas on this too. He had what he called within space-time continuum the block universe. Some similar ideas, but I liken it to a stack of photographs, in that each moment in time is at that location is like a stack of photographs all put on top of each other. And for whatever reason, we don't really know what the catalyst is, but for whatever reason, two moments in that stack of photos will resonate at the same frequency or very, very close to the same frequency. And that's when we start getting a glimpse of other moments in time and having things like these time slips and what have you. So when things like that happen, yeah, there are moments in which the future can actually influence the past.
And so I guess this is kind of like the logical next step from time slip, which I feel like we've done a pretty good job of kind of like touching on that, but more into the idea of time travel, like consciously choosing time travel. I guess the possibility of real time travel. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, we see kind of those ideas and concepts already in like our theoretical physics. They talk about, well, if you could, get close enough to a black hole, which is going to bend space and time. Time is going to work differently around the black hole than it will on Earth. So then, you come back to Earth after being around a black hole, and you'll be at a different point in time. Okay, that's wonderful, but we're not getting near a black hole anytime soon.
Yeah.
And there is a bit of time dilation between, being outside the planet and down here. You have the couple of twin brother astronauts that are now different ages, by a couple of seconds, but
that's still very cool.
It's still very cool. Yeah. But when we talk about, the idea of really experiencing time travel, really doing something like this, a lot of people immediately jump to time machine, DeLorean and a flux capacitor.
Yeah.
And, I really don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to have more to do with ourselves and our consciousness and being able to tune our bodies into the right frequency to be able to not just see a slip, but to actually be able to send ourselves there and experience that point in time for a longer duration. And I liken this to, and I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the book, Somewhere in Time. And
I have
it stars, it stars Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour. This is a while ago, 1980. And he basically convinces himself, he clears out, he sees this, this is this historical tale. He's a playwright. He's kind of, having trouble writing his next play. Sees this historic photo of this beautiful woman, and he's just extremely, extremely drawn to it. Finds out some information about her, finds that in her house, she had passed away. She had become very old, and finds this book, Travels Through Time. That's where I got the book title from. I'm not ashamed to admit it. But it was written by a professor that he had in college. Talks to his professor, and the professor describes a time slip, but the professor also mentions that by lying in this room where he was in this castle in Italy or wherever it was, that he felt that he was really, really there in that moment in whatever year it was. So Reeves' character, Richard, decides what he's going to do is go to this hotel, clears out all of the modern technology out of the room, sets it up with enough stuff to give him the impression that it's 1912, and convinces himself, essentially wills his consciousness back to 1912, and he's actually able to have an experience there with the woman.
That's fast. That's not okay. Yeah. First of all, I'm going to check out that movie.
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of it, it's a love story, but it's got all the supernatural time travel stuff wrapped around it. It's wonderful.
Well, like I said, kind of with the Alaska Triangle, I mean, we could spend months getting to the bottom of so many of these topics and concepts. But I do want to let everybody know this book does come out next week. Well, like I said, the podcast will be out, so the book's out. So actually, Mike, I only have one last question for you, really, and that's just where can people find you, follow you? Where can they find your books? Specifically, I guess maybe some of the books we discussed today. Also, I guess we didn't mention it, but we talked a lot about the shadow people, and you do have a book called The Shadow Realm. And now
it's A Walk in the Shadows. Yeah,
A Walk in the Shadows. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You can find me in my website is mikericksecker.com. Links to all my books and everything can be found there. I also have my online learning portal, which is connecteduniverseportal.com, where we dive into a lot of these different esoteric topics. You can find the books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those great locations. I do have some events and book signings coming up. Bell Mansion, Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's August 12th. I'm going to be at Michigan Paracon, which is the end of August 24th to 26th. Phenomicon out in Utah, which is September 6th through 10th. So not only will I have my new book and other books at that particular one, Phenomicon, but I'm also part of the film festival there with the Shadow Dimension docuseries. And that can be watched on Tubi TV, Roku channel, and other places.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Doug. It's been a great conversation.